Welcome back to the Change Physician podcast. I am your host, Dr. Melissa Cady, joined by my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and we have an amazing and interesting guest who is a physician in the UK, but also a YouTuber and podcaster, and his name is Dr. Ali Abdaal, and we are so grateful to have you on our show today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to this chat. It's kind of weird to be speaking to like two American doctors at once, kind of because
from across the pond.
Yeah, and especially because in the UK, kind of like quite a lot of people feel like they want to move their career over to the US because there's this perception that, oh, in the US it's all like flowers and roses and you make loads of money and the training's super quick. And I've been kind of looking into that stuff a lot over the last couple of years. So yeah, it's interesting to be talking to you guys.
Yeah, well, awesome. Well, I think, it's going to be a very interesting conversation because there are differences, but I think there are a lot of slivers of similarities too, of what we go through psychologically through this process. But just to roll us back to a little bit of the beginning, can you give us an idea of what even put you in the direction of medicine, or why did you go into it?
Yeah, honestly, I didn't really have any good reasons for going into it. So when you're of my ethnicity, so I'm from a Pakistani background originally, and I now live in the UK. If you're Asian and you get good grades, it's almost considered a default that you will just go into medicine. So that's kind of the vibe, especially because like my mum's a doctor, my dad's a doctor. Like when you're young, there are so few careers that you're actually exposed to. It was only when I actually got to university that I realized people were studying history just because they liked history. I previously thought that, obviously I'm going to study medicine kind of because I'm going to be a doctor. So it's kind of on that background where it's kind of the default option. When I was young, I was super into like coding and web design and stuff. And so I was toying with the idea of doing computer science. But I kind of reasoned around about age 16 when we had to decide one way or another, and kind of reasoned that it's not very cool to be someone who codes, but it's really freaking cool to be a doctor who codes. So I thought medicine plus keeping the tech stuff going on the side might be interesting. I also reasoned that 6 years at university for med school is better than 3 years at university for any other degree, because everyone says that university is the best time of your life. And I kind of reasoned that I wanted to have a job, because I did like science and I like the idea of helping people and I like teaching. I reasoned that I wanted a job where I wouldn't spend so much time sitting in front of a computer. So those were some of the reasons that led me towards medicine. But unfortunately, there was none of this like, I've been wanting to be a doctor since I was 3 because I just love people so much.
Yeah. So what's that process to get into medical school, or being that it's, 6 years is what you're saying there. Do you mind describing kind of that process?
Oh, sure. So in the US, after high school, you've got your 4 years of college and then you have your 4 years of med school, I believe. In the UK, we don't really have college. Like it's not really a thing. Instead, you finish secondary school or high school at 18, and most people immediately go on to university. And so at university, you study medicine, which is usually a 5 or 6 year degree. And so straight after school, you go straight into med school. And so you're really deciding around about age 16 that I want to be a doctor, therefore I'm going to apply to medicine. And then you start gearing your kind of application in that direction by doing volunteering and work experience and taking all the entrance exams, which is very different to the American system, where you have a long time to actually decide for sure whether you actually want to do medicine.
That makes me kind of curious, because we do have people, and certainly in my medical school, we had people who were older that went into medicine. Do you then see that in the UK at all, who maybe they completed their first university training after high school, and then they decided they wanted to go to medicine? Is there a path for them to?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a thing called graduate entry medicine. So while there's like 30 something medical schools in the US, in the UK, that do undergrad entry, so entry at age 18, there are another handful that do graduate entry. So you've done a degree and then you're doing med school. Usually it's more of an accelerated program, so I think it's 4 years in most places.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so it's interesting because that transition, we'll dive into kind of like your experiences, whatnot through that, but I'm just curious to tie in when you become a consultant. So I've looked at, Australia and New Zealand, and there's a lot of influence there, or very similar, it seems like, when it comes to like the next level, when you become a consultant. How does that, after those years you were just talking about, how does that tie into when you become a consultant?
Sure. So assuming you've done everything on time, i.e. you went straight into medical school and you haven't taken any breaks, blah, blah, blah. Let's take me, for example. I graduated med school age 24. And so I became a doctor and I had doctor in my title. At that point, you have 2 years of what we call the foundation program, which I suppose is sort of like intern year, but not really, because during the foundation program for those 2 years, you do multiple rotations in different specialties. So I did cardiology, geriatrics, general surgery, psychiatry, obstetrics and gynecology, and I was meant to go on stroke, but because coronavirus happened, we also ended up staying on the same ones just to avoid disruption. So I did 2 rounds of obstetrics and gynecology. And so you're a doctor, but you're kind of a very junior doctor in that you're just kind of doing the clerical, writing a discharge letter, taking blood occasionally, doing the history and the examination, and leaving it to the senior doctors who know what they're doing to actually come up with the management plan. Then after those 2 years, you've got a choice, right? Do I want to do medicine? Do I want to do surgery? Do I want to do general practice? And then you would, let's say you want to do plastic surgery. You would do 3 years, 2 or 3 years of core surgical training, where you said, I want to be a surgeon, but I don't know what sort of surgeon yet. And therefore you do multiple surgical rotations. And then after that, you apply for plastic surgery specialty, which is another 5 years of plastic surgery, which is then when you become a plastic surgery resident. So you have these like 4 or 5 years before you're officially deciding what specialty you actually want to go down. And then after that 5 years of training, again, assuming you've done everything on time and you're not taking time out to do fellowships and all this stuff, then you can become a consultant. And the earliest you can become a consultant is sort of age 32, 33 or thereabouts.
Wow. And that's where, from a financial standpoint, that's where things shift, where it's considerably different, or?
Yeah.
No?
So when you're a trainee, when you're a resident or a registrar, as we would call it, your salary is probably in the 50 to 60,000 pound a year range, maybe approaching 70,000 pounds a year if you're, doing lots of extra shifts. When you become a consultant, I think starting salary is around about 80,000, and it goes, fluctuates between 80 and 100,000 a year. That is basically as much as you can expect to earn as a consultant in the National Health Service. If you want to earn much more than that, you have to start doing private practice. Private practice is weird in the UK in that it's very hard to get into. There's a lot of competition. You have to pay your own like medical legal indemnity and all that stuff. So usually it's only when you're quite senior that you can actually get around to doing private practice. And people who do lots of private practice can be earning kind of 200, 300K. But there is, it's a lot of effort. So most consultants tend to be on between 80 and 100, 110,000 pounds a year.
Gotcha.
Interesting. So, there's so many differences, yet some similarities between the US and the UK so far. But I'd be kind of curious, is you kind of went into this path because of, it was sort of formed for you, the path towards medicine. When did you, or have you had any challenges or thought, maybe this wasn't the right route for me?
I don't think I've ever thought it wasn't the right route for me. It's more that basically ever since I started medical school and I started interacting with real life doctors, I always had this pet question that I used to ask them, which is that if you won the lottery, would you still do medicine? And that's an interesting question to ask, because about half of them say, no, I would leave immediately because it's not for me. And the other half said, well, I'd probably still do medicine because it's quite fun, but I would definitely go part-time. I've basically met 0 people who have said I would continue to work full-time. And I kind of realized that, this is interesting. Like, as much as I kind of like medicine and I think it's cool and fun and stuff, when we speak to consultants and even registrars and other junior doctors, it seems like this is not all that it's cracked up to be. And so my whole thing during med school and beyond was, how do I mitigate against this risk? Where like I really don't want to be in a position where I'm essentially shackled to a job that I might not enjoy because I have to pay the bills through it. And that's why I started to set up all these businesses and multiple streams of passive income, basically to get to a point where I could make money from other stuff and then I could do medicine for fun. That was always my kind of North Star.
Yeah. Speaking from somebody, and for those listening, they may not know that the last 12 years I've been in, I can't believe it's already that long, but last 12 years I've been in private practice. I've never worked officially full-time. And from the get-go, I worked 2 to 3 days a week. And the one thing I'll have to say that, I'm really inspired by with what you're doing online. It's not just from a medical standpoint, but there's a certain transparency and you just have this, you're very good at just communicating, or I mean, you're very good with the video where you look very comfortable. It seems like you're having conversations, and it really, I think, speaks to some of the just the real life facts about things, or at least your feelings. And so I think you're really good at depicting or trying to explain the thought process that you're going through. And I have to say, when I was going through it, I don't think it was in words. It was just a gut instinct or feeling that this doesn't feel right. And so I want to pull that into the fact that you go through, you know, medicine, and a lot of people don't realize what it's really like until you're deep in it. And especially in America, there's a lot of debt, either from $100,000 to $400,000 once you're done with medical school. So I'm kind of curious, you know, because you talk about people that don't want to work, you know, if they won the lottery, if they're going through this medical system in the UK, what are some of those things that make people feel like full-time is not really for me, or even part-time is not for me if I can make money elsewhere?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is just the kind of grueling nature of the job. Like, and in the UK, like it's kind of weird speaking to Americans about this, because we actually don't work that much compared to you guys. Like, for example, as a junior doctor, I was capped at about 48 hours a week, which is absolutely nothing. You know, like, you know, if you expect to go to America, you know, 80-hour weeks and stuff are fairly normal.
Or more.
Yeah, exactly. And equally, even the residents, or registrars as we would call them, would be doing maybe sort of 50 hours a week on average if they're really unlucky. And sure, you might have some weeks where you're doing kind of 60, 70, but then you'd be sort of, it would average out because you'd have a few days off the following week. But even then, even on that background of actually not working too much, there still seems to be, amongst most people that I've spoken to, a general vibe of, you know, just borderline baseline level of resentment that, you know, we're not getting paid a lot. We've got these long hours. The rota is constantly understaffed in most places. Therefore, you end up doing more on-call shifts. Maybe when it comes to the training, surgical training, I know a lot of people complain about that. You actually don't get a lot of time during work to get your case numbers up. Therefore, you have to come in on off days. On top of that, you've got all of these just like long drawn out various hoops you have to jump through for every specialty. And at the end of the year, you have to show you've done all these 8 different things. And that process and all the admin and paperwork associated with that gets a lot of people down. People think, oh, you know, it's my day off, but I have to come back into work and do all my paperwork. This is all stuff that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, but it's just, even in the UK where we actually don't work that much compared to you, that's that undercurrent of like, this is not an ideal kind of lifestyle.
Yeah. And oh, sorry.
I kind of want to jump in there real quick, because that kind of brings us back to this idea. It's not necessarily the hours that you work, even in the United States, that's the big issue. But what I'm kind of hearing you say, Ali, is there's almost an externalization of control. Is there a feeling in the UK from the physicians that they're being like, there's the government's telling them what to do, or I mean, how autonomous do they feel in their practice versus how do they feel that they're practicing, you know, being told exactly what to do through their practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get the impression there is some sense of lack of control. You know, there's a phrase that goes around that the NHS runs on goodwill, and the impression I get from a lot of people is that they are kind of having to go the extra mile, but not really being compensated for it in terms of money, in terms of working conditions, and they're doing it kind of out of the goodness of their hearts and because they care about the system and stuff. In terms of the control thing, people say that, you know, a lot of medicine is just following the guidelines. I'm still very junior myself, so I don't know to what extent people actually complain about this, but I think it's probably a good thing that, you know, the system is not reliant on individuals being particularly maverick and actually reliant on guidelines. But definitely, you know, amongst a lot of registrars and consultants that I've spoken to, there is a sense that, you know, the way that our system is not ideal, but it's the way it has to be because of the nice guidelines, or because of, you know, what the guidelines are around this thing, or because of cost issues and stuff.
Well, and that's an interesting point between what's what seems to be best by the evidence versus what we as humans kind of chafe at. Because and I've had discussions with physicians in the United States who get really upset about what they call algorithmic medicine. I'm like, well, actually, have you ever looked at the data on algorithms compared to clinical judgment? Well, no. Well, for the last 50 plus years, the best clinicians, if they're really, really good, seem to equal what the algorithms do rather than exceed what the algorithms do. So, but again, it's kind of come to this control issue, and it's kind of interesting to hear that even in the UK, that there's people who just don't feel like, I don't know, if I was working 48 hours a week, that'd be a whole different, kind of boat compared to what we were doing in our hospitals. But I don't know. It's an interesting conundrum, because as we kind of were talking about before we got on, you were saying a lot of UK physicians have this idea of the United States being like the golden land of opportunity for medicine, and we make a bunch of money, and it's I guess it sort of is the Wild West of medicine, but we're still as unhappy or more. And in the United States, I see tons of forum discussions on, well, how can we leave the United States and go practice in the UK or Canada or Australia or New Zealand? I guess for the audience, the grass is no greener anywhere else. It's really kind of take control of your life and your practice and what you want to do. So
yeah, well, that whole wild, I mean, obviously our medical system has our country, and we won't get into all that, but there's always some underbelly to any country, and when it comes to medicine, there's so many things being done that aren't really in alignment with the evidence. And of course, when you have a fee-for-service type of system that is rewarding things being done to patients, it's something that Kevin and I have talked about in the past. You can get in conflict with people if they are focusing on what you get reimbursed for. That can lead you astray and lead you into a place where it's not really what's best for the patient. And Kevin and I have had these moments of coming to crossroads. The money doesn't mean anything if you're not doing the right thing, and so following your heart and doing what's best for patients, that's something that people have to contend with, whether they're willing to face that or look at those side by side. Because when there's money tied to it and it's your paying for the roof over your head, it's a struggle for some people, and they don't always want to face that. So and I have to say, talking about how this starting part-time and getting pushed hard to work 126 hours I clocked one time in my general surgery internship, I think it put a bad taste in my mouth, like, okay, let me see what I've been taught. This doesn't make sense. I don't want to be burned out, and I really want to travel, and I want to do other things. So let me just pick out the number of the minimal amount of money I need to make to pay for my living expenses. And that's where I'm going to start. So I can always work more, but let's just stick with, the fundamentals. But I think in this country, we just like keep going on this hamster wheel, and we don't ever get off. So speaking of that, you're taking a year off, which we almost never hear in this country. I'm curious if you can dive into, leading up into this break. You've obviously for the last several years have kind of exploded out on YouTube and other social media outlets. I'm kind of curious what made you want to go in that direction, and just kind of, summarize your feelings about this whole experience.
Yeah, so for us, it's quite common to take some time out after the first 2 years of the foundation program, because, we've been in education basically forever. You finish school at 18, you go straight to university, 6 years, and then 2 years of the foundation program. This year, I think in this batch, about 63% of people took time out and kind of had this year off, which is essentially what I'm doing as well. In the past, the figure's been much higher. It's been sort of in the 70s to 80%. People will often do things like they'll go to Australia for a year, or they'll just kind of locum, do some extra shifts for a few months. That'll make them money, and then they'll travel the world. Some people do clinical fellowships. Some people do research. So there's all sorts of different things you can do in this year off. I suppose I'm being a little bit unusual in that I don't have any clinical commitments at all. I'd initially planned to travel the world, but then the whole Corona thing happened. And so at the moment, I'm just, enjoying unemployment. I've been officially unemployed for about 4 weeks now, and it's great. And, the YouTube stuff is going very well. And so I feel like for me, the opportunity cost of going back, of going into a training pathway in medicine, for example, is just way too high, because my time and essentially my time is a lot more leveraged when I'm making videos and courses and ebooks and kind of building up that portfolio than it is in medicine. And I can always go back to medicine when I feel like it. So that's kind of what I was thinking. Most of my friends have also taken this year out. Most of them are doing something at least vaguely medical. My plan is that I'll enjoy unemployment while I continue to enjoy it. And then at some point, if I get bored, then I'm looking into maybe going to Australia to do some emergency medicine as like a, year abroad type situation.
I love it. Well, I just have to say, I love Australia, New Zealand, so you got to go for sure. If you want a few connections, I might need to connect you with a couple people, but yeah, that's awesome. Good for you. Kevin?
Yeah. So returning then back was when you were early on or recognizing this idea that you didn't want to be shackled to a career, like putting yourself all in eggs in one basket, going in this path when you ask your wonderful question about the lottery, which I'm going to steal. I think I love that question. When you were looking at creating an alternative income stream, or actually in many ways an alternative career path, what was your initial thinking? What were you how did you approach that into because you're still limited in time. I mean, if you're in university doing this stuff, you still don't have a lot of time. So how was it that you made that decision path to say, well, I'm going to choose to go in this route as being likely to have that potential of providing that secondary career or secondary income stream?
Yeah, so I think the thing that really turned me on to this idea was reading The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, which is like the Bible for basically everyone my age who does this sort of stuff. I'm sure people older and younger as well. And then I still have the Evernote file from 2011 where I was. So the thing that sparked this off was actually just before university. I tried to buy a new MacBook, and I found some dude on the UK equivalents of Craigslist selling one. And I went to Paddington Station to meet up with him, and I forked over £900 in cash, which was 2 years worth of my savings from like doing tutoring and stuff. And it turned out that because I was an idiot and I didn't know what was going on, he sold me like a really super old model rather than the one that I was looking for. So I felt like, I was like, I'd been scammed out of my life savings. And so I needed to make some money. And I have this Evernote document from that time where I was like, okay, how do I make money? And I kind of made a list of all the things that I thought I was good at. And on that list was teaching, because I'd always enjoyed teaching and I felt I was pretty good at it. I also did fairly well in the medical school entrance exam. So I was like, okay, maybe I can teach some of those. And I was into web design. Like I'd been designing websites for like businesses and stuff since like the age of 11. So I knew how to make a website look pretty and I knew how to code. I kind of combined all these. I was like, hang on, why don't I teach courses for these exams? Which is a fairly standard idea that a lot of medical students have these days. But I think the key thing is when I had the idea, I also realized that, hang on, I don't just need to run this course at my local mosque for like 5 kids. I can actually make a pretty looking website and I can just market it nationally and let's see what happens. And that was kind of the first business that really started to take off. I'd been dabbling in kind of trying to make money online through high school. Nothing had ever worked. But then this business, like all of those failures, culminated in teaching me the skills that I needed, right place, right time, right circumstances. And this started to take off. So in our first year, we had like 100 students. And the next year we had 1,000 students. And the third year we had 2,000. And so this was making a pretty decent sum of money. Like I think I was taking home a salary of like 30 or 40,000 pounds each year of med school, which was absolutely insane because that's like basically more than a doctor gets paid once you're fully qualified. And then that was kind of step number 1. Step number 2 was kind of turning that into like online question banks and online courses. Step number 3 was recognizing, hang on, I should make YouTube videos. And that was that was the thing that has now kind of skyrocketed.
Yeah. I was thinking of you had this little short video talking about somebody that was like, talking about Skillshare, and they threw something on there and they only had one person buy and they were so mad and nothing was happening and you're like, dude, you got to provide free content. You got to like put value out in the world, and at some point later you can recoup in money in some other form, like a course or something like that. But I think it really speaks to the fact that there's so much value that physicians can give in the sense of just their background and training. And what would you say to physicians as far as how important it is to create a website or do a blog or putting themselves out there? Because obviously there's a lot of psychological components to that, but how important would you say it is for them to get out there?
This is the thing that I think there's almost nothing more important than that. Maybe physical health, mental health, relationships, but beyond that, like, well, I honestly feel that one of the single best, like, highest leverage things anyone can do is just put themselves out there a little bit more. Yeah, especially as doctors, as physicians. Basically, like, if you're a physician, then anything you do just becomes instantly more interesting. Like, for example, let's say you're super into cooking. If you're a physician who's super into cooking, suddenly that's brandable. Whereas if you're just like a random person who's into cooking, you're competing against a zillion other random people who are into cooking. If you're a physician who's into fitness, oh my God, like, you've got the makings of a fantastic brand there. But if you're just some random dude who's into fitness, you're competing against a zillion other people. The fact that you're a doctor just makes everything you do, like, inherently more interesting. I think I strongly feel everyone should have, like, a personal blog, personal website. Everyone should be on Twitter. Just because, at the very least, when you put stuff out there, it kind of acts as a serendipity vehicle in that, my blog posts, my YouTube videos, my podcast episodes, these are all digital assets that are working for me while I sleep. Kind of like having money in the stock market or money in real estate. It's working for you while you sleep. But these digital assets are working for you to help connect you with people that might be interesting. So someone right now in America might be reading a blog post that I've written, or an email newsletter, or a tweet, or a YouTube video, and might be thinking, oh, this is interesting, and might want to reach out to me. Like, there's so many opportunities for serendipity that happen when you stop putting yourself out there online. And if you don't, then you're kind of confining your network of people to the village, effectively, that you're born into. And you're not venturing outside the village. And because of the internet, it's because of the internet that we're connecting now, and, we're going to become friends and stuff. And, this stuff wouldn't have happened if I hadn't put myself online, and if you guys didn't have this podcast where you're sort of actively putting yourselves out there. So I'm just, like, hugely bullish on the fact that I think everyone should have a personal blog. Everyone should be on Twitter.
I love that.
So do I love that. And I do love how you kind of emphasized that as physicians, just whatever it is, there's something more interesting. So, because we tend to devalue ourselves. I mean, whoever it is, almost everybody out there has something interesting about them, but we tend to think that nobody else is interested. And I'm always kind of astounded from a physician standpoint. I've talked to them like, well, I don't know what I could do. I don't know what I could say. I'm like, your experiences in your day-to-day life are interesting. Like, if you're a urologist, your experiences in your day-to-day practice are going to be interesting to a lot of people out there, because all this stuff that you think is commonplace and everyday is not. It can be uniquely fascinating. So, and I also loved how you commented when early on you were, like, identifying the 3 things that you were good at. Like, what are my skill sets? And as physicians, there's an opportunity. Physicians, you're medicine, right? There's that asterisk there. So I really like that. But talking about serendipity, the other part about the stock market, and if you kind of look about investing, you can't time the market. You have to, put your money in and all this stuff, and you don't know when the good days are going to be. So with you and your content creation, was there ever a moment where you put out something and you're like, I'm just doing this because I kind of want to do it, but no one's going to ever watch this, that you were kind of shocked at? Or on the flip hand, that you were like, created something, you're like, this is so awesome, everybody's going to get it, and nobody paid attention?
Oh God, yeah, absolutely, all the time. And just kind of to speak to your point about sort of physicians undervaluing ourselves, I think a big part of this is because the only people we hang out with are other physicians. And therefore, the fact that we're physicians is not interesting in the slightest. But if we think for everyone else in the world, the fact that you're a physician who's into cooking is, inherently interesting. Whereas to all our friends, it's like, oh mate, you're a doctor, who cares? I think a big part of why so many people I know sort of are reluctant to put themselves online is because they feel like, oh, what will my medical colleagues say when they see that I am, brandishing myself as a doctor? There is kind of a perception that, for example, the way the Americans do it, where you stick MD after your title, it's kind of considered in the UK to be a little bit crass, like, oh, it's not very classy to do that. You wouldn't do that. And the only reason is because we don't want our other doctor colleagues thinking, oh, look at him, he's got doctor in his Instagram bio, he's getting big for his boots. But I think we don't realize that, how it comes across to the general public, who does not care about that. They're not thinking, and equally with all the like coronavirus stuff, I got the impression that physicians were very reluctant to comment on it, because we were holding ourselves to a bar of, I need to be an expert in epidemiology and infectious diseases and respiratory medicine and intensive care in order to even say a single thing about coronavirus. Whereas the general public is like, bro, you're a doctor, tell me about the virus. So it's a different sort of standard that we hold ourselves to, and I'm not sure it's particularly warranted. But to your original point, like there's a quote that I like, which is that it only takes one piece of content to change your life, but you just never know which one that's going to be. And so like the very first video I made, I was speaking to an iPhone, just lying in bed saying that, hey, you know, I'm going to do this vlog. At the very least, my grandma is going to watch it and it's going to be good memories to look back on later on in life. And I've done so many videos where I put so much effort into them. I think, oh, this one's going to be big. I did one where I explained all of the science in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And I drew diagrams explaining sodium pumps and how all the different herbs that Professor Snape was mentioning are actually all these like interesting things, and like voltage gated calcium channel and how that activates. I thought that was going to do well. It did absolutely terribly. No one cared. But, you know, it's fine. You know, when you're into the content thing, you just have to keep plugging away at it. And it's like going to the gym. Like, you don't expect a single workout to have any change at all. It's the fact that you've done it every week for 3 years that actually makes the change over time.
Yeah, consistency for sure.
Although now I want to watch your Harry Potter video. I'm like, that sounds really interesting to me.
Yeah, man. And how Hagrid probably has gigantism rather than acromegaly because he's got the growth plate fusion, and you know, all this kind of stuff. Petrificus totalis being like botulinum toxin. Oh God.
Oh my God. You put some effort into that. That's awesome.
It took me ages to research, and no one cared.
Well, that's usually the way it goes. It's always the stuff that's like off the cuff, like emotional, or like something just seems really genuine and somehow grab at their heart. Like, it's amazing how these little short videos that don't have the best background or the lighting, like those are the ones that draw attention.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, you know, in the past couple of weeks, I've released like, you know, a few half-an-hour long videos. Like 30 minutes is ridiculous for a YouTube video, where I just kind of talk to the camera and be like, yeah, so guys, I'm leaving medicine, and here's why, and here are my thoughts, and, you know, the lottery question. And those videos have done phenomenally well, whereas a video that I've meticulously crafted with like drone shots and like stabilized camera footage, no one cares. Yeah.
Amazing.
Weird.
Yeah, well, it takes that experience, I think, to like realize those things. You know, there were so many thoughts, and one of them is you kind of called me out too, in a good way, because Kevin always gets on me because I'm a physician that loves fitness and all this stuff, and he keeps like, you need to do something in that realm. And I'm, you know, it's funny how we hesitate, and I think it's natural to feel like you got to know everything, like you said, like with the coronavirus and everything. But
there's another important part to that, though, Melissa, about and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, Ollie, for sure, is because of the internet and the space that is in, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. And if we're thinking as physicians that we can't comment because we're scared, or we don't want to, you know, in the UK, apparently it's, you know, you're getting too uppity. In the United States, I don't know, they just maybe tear you down or whatever. But if we are not in that space talking about things that we understand, and we may not be complete experts. You know, I'm not a critical care physician, but I'm an anesthesia background, so I have some familiarity there, which is better than 99% of the population. If we're not going to be in that space, someone else is going to go into it. And the concern, and particularly even with like the coronavirus, if someone else gets in that space with not maybe the same knowledge, who are putting out really harmful messages, we're almost doing a disservice by not getting out there as physicians, as people with, you would think, expertise in whatever that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like a lot of us, you know, there's a balance here, obviously, because you don't want to comment on something that you're completely unqualified to talk about. But I think a lot of us have an over-reliance on qualifications. Like, I've got a friend who wants to write a book aimed at lay people about kind of problems associated in pregnancy, but just kind of doing it from a little bit more of a scientific viewpoint, which hasn't really been done. And he was saying that, yeah, I should probably wait until I'm a consultant before writing this. I was like, why the hell would you wait until you're a consultant? Like, what difference does it make? It's not like anyone is going to think like, oh, mate, you're only a resident. Like, you're not allowed to educate people about preeclampsia. That's not really a thing. But for him, there was this thing of, oh, you know, I need to be fully qualified before I'm allowed to comment on this. But then, you know, where does that stop? When you're a consultant, there's all these extra qualifications you can do. You can be like, oh, I'm technically not a subspecialist expert in early pregnancy care. Therefore, I shouldn't be the one to write this book about, early pregnancy bleeding. Well, let's leave it to someone else. And eventually nothing ends up happening to take an extreme viewpoint.
Yeah. I was there was something that crossed my mind earlier about when we're talking how physicians, maybe they undervalue you, but there's also a thing, and definitely in America, probably because we probably work too much and don't have, spend free time doing other things. And I almost get this feeling that people are almost surprised that we do something outside of medicine. Like if they feel like that's our focus, that's all we do. And I think it's almost a shock factor that we're putting ourselves out there that's not necessarily directly medicine, or it could just be that we're online trying to educate people. But do you think there's some kind of play there too as well for you in the UK?
Oh, definitely. Like there is this huge myth that medicine is the single hardest thing that anyone in the world could ever do. It's a myth that's propagated by medical students everywhere complaining about how their exams are. It's a myth that's propagated by people applying to med school being like, oh my God, it's going to be such a huge deal. Like when I get into med school, it's going to be like hardest thing ever. How can you have all that, how can you possibly have time to make a YouTube video once a week? And when you get there, you realize that actually a lot of it, and like in my first year of med school, I bought into this myth. I thought that, what medical school looks like is that you have this enormous pile of textbooks and you're weighed down all the time and you're constantly stressed and you're constantly pulling all-nighters. And it was only halfway through the year group that I realized, hang on, this is actually quite manageable. Medicine is definitely not that conceptually difficult compared to like maths or economics, where you have to understand stuff. It's mostly just about memorizing this torrent of information. Oh, this is actually doable. And when I started approaching it with more of a how hard can this be attitude rather than this is, oh my God, this is the hardest thing ever, it just really changed the game. And I think people are always surprised, but you're a junior doctor. How do you have time to make a podcast or whatever? It's like, well, it's only 48 hours a week. There's loads of time in the weekends and evenings and stuff. But I guess it's slightly different for you guys, where 48 hours a week is considered the dream.
Yeah, well, I'll say I probably work like 30, if that, right now. And,
solid.
And even people that they call me or something like, I know you're really busy, I don't want to interrupt you. And I'm like, okay, I answered the phone. I'm obviously not in the operating room right now taking care of a patient. But it is funny, the society's perception of you, and what their beliefs are that you are as a physician.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's something that we enjoy as physicians, propagating. Oh yeah, it's really hard. But hey,
makes you feel better, that little selfish part of you.
Yeah, but I guess it's, like friends of mine working in management consulting and law in London, they're sort of, have days where they get into the office at 7 a.m. They don't leave until midnight. They don't get paid any extra. They don't complain. They just know it's part of the job. And at least as doctors in the UK, we complain about it. So, yeah.
Exactly. Kevin, any other questions?
Oh, I was just going to ask you, it seems like reading has also been an important part of your journey. I know you have part of your YouTube channel is your book club, which I think is fantastic. And I think that's important for physicians, particularly in the United States, where, again, the hours or whatever, where we lose all this stuff. And you have a lot of non-medical books in there. So you're a junior doctor, but your book recommendations aren't Robin's Pathology. So how important is it to you to read outside of medicine, or how valuable has that been to you over your career so far?
Oh God, I can't even put an ROI on it. Like these days, if someone recommends a book, I will just buy it without looking at the price tag, just because, the amount of value you could possibly get from a book is astronomical. Like, I think I illegally downloaded the 4 Hour Workweek, but then I later ended up buying it for like, £7. And that book's completely changed my life and may help me set up like a 7-figure business. And it's just absolutely insane how much value you can get from a single book. And the other thing I always kind of recommend to people is that Audible is like the single, like if I could only subscribe to one thing in the world, it would be Audible, because the amount of audiobooks you can get through when you're like commuting to work, or if you're on the train, or if you're at the gym, it's just, again, absolutely insane. And there's so much good stuff out there that, yeah, I think if I wasn't reading, I wouldn't be doing anything with my life. Like every time you hear an interview with a famously successful person, they always say that, books have changed my life. And they say that every other successful person they know also reads loads. And so, yeah, I'm very, very big on the reading front. And I think more people should do it because it's great.
Yeah.
So to make that more difficult, then, if you had to only pick three 3 books, or Tim Ferriss, I know, does what books do you most commonly give? What would be the book that you most commonly give as a present? And then what book would you say everybody should read? Whether, and again, that may not be necessarily super famous or better. The book you think everybody should read, and the book that you would say that you have gifted most to others.
Oh, good questions. So the book that I've gifted most often is a little book by a guy called Austin Kleon, and it's called Show Your Work. And it's like this thick, it's for people listening, it's about 2 centimeters or an inch thick. It takes about half an hour to read. And it's a very short book. It's, very small and kind of like a pamphlet. And he basically argues for why everyone should have a blog and should be sharing their work online. And he argues that, we all have this thing where, oh, I'm not enough of an expert, or why would anyone care what I have to say? And, who's going to read my stuff? But he argues that if at least one person in the world could possibly benefit from what you have to say, then you, in a way, have a moral obligation to do so. And that was the book that in 2016 I read and made me set up my own blog, which was ultimately the thing that led to my YouTube channel forming. So I always keep multiple copies of this in my apartment, and anytime someone comes over and someone's like, "Oh, I've been thinking of doing this online thing," I just whip out a copy and just give it to them. You're like, "Guys, you've got to read this. This is the one. Show Your Work by Austin Kleon." And I think kind of a book that I'd recommend everyone read. Probably, there's a really good book. Are you familiar with Darren Brown?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he's like this psychological illusionist, magician-y guy who's like, one of the crown jewels of the UK, but he's recently started to make it big in America. Weirdly, he has written a book about happiness called Happy, Why More or Less Everything is Absolutely Fine. And it's all about Stoicism and the philosophy of Stoicism and how it leads to less stress and more tranquility and more happiness. And that's one of my favorite books of all time. So it's what I'd recommend to everyone.
Oh, fantastic. I'm looking forward to reading that one now, because Darren Brown, if I'm remembering correctly, is the mentalist, and at least here he did the thing, The Push, on Netflix, which was, if you haven't watched that one, oh my God, where how could you take a normal person and get him to the point where they would push someone to their death by the end of an evening? That was like crazy. But
wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah, he's one of my idols. He's probably the person I would say, like, if I could have dinner with anyone, it would be him. He's great. But yeah, he's written a book about happiness, and it's pretty good.
Well, you just made me think of a couple books that, as you just said, I'm just going to order them, and they're going to be added to my list of things to read.
Nice.
Before we finish off, I just want, if you could, I think it's really interesting that you're doing a podcast with your brother called Not Overthinking. Do you mind just telling us just a little bit about that, or anything else you want to share that you're doing? You want to lead anyone to what's going on in your life?
Yeah, so my brother and I have a podcast that we do once a week. It's called Not Overthinking. We kind of overthink about a lot of things that we think more people should think about. So in some episodes, we've talked about kind of, what makes an awkward silence, and, what's the best way to make friends, and how should we treat kids in our life, and how should we treat adults in our life. So, there's these sorts of like socializing-y, relationship-y type topics. We had a really good one a couple of weeks ago with this guy called Paul Millard, who was a management consultant for 10 years working in New York. And then he realized that kind of this whole corporate ladder workism that is endemic in the West was not the way forward. So now he lives off the fat of the land and kind of chills. And he writes a lot about kind of combating this attitude of workism that we all have, where we are defined by the job that we do. And the first question we want to ask people is, so what do you do? And it becomes like this yardstick by which we measure people. So that was an interesting episode. So occasionally we have guests on talking about their thoughts, but yeah, it's like a weekly podcast where my brother and I have a chat about whatever's on our mind.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'll put all the links to everything we've talked about so they can find out, or even some of these books you mentioned. I'll find anything that you talk about those so that they can
Awesome.
take a listen themselves.
Love it.
Kevin?
No, I really appreciate you coming on, and it's enjoyable watching your career path here and how you've taken control of your life at a pretty young age. I mean, I just want people to watch this and see.
Yeah, I don't know if I have control of it. Like, my mom constantly tells me I'm lacking any direction in life, and I agree with her. But my view is, it's not going anywhere.
Well, maybe
there's no rush to be a consultant.
You're comfortable with being uncomfortable, I guess, would be the other thing. Comfortable.
I guess so.
So, but it was a really enjoyable conversation. I got a couple great book recommendations out of there, so I'm looking forward to read. So anything else, Melissa?
Just one last thing. I think this kind of, people should go and listen to his content. It really is amazing. And I've realized some of the things you said, not just in diversifying your source of income, not just trading your time for money, but even diversifying your identities, that you're not just a physician, that you have other things that bring value to this world, and being open to that and honoring all of those things and exploring those other things really can allow you to ride the wave that you're riding now, or creating waves in good ways. There's a lot of good things that can come from that. So thank you for the work you're doing and just putting the content out there, and obviously got our attention.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin, you want to take us out?
Sure. Well, again, thanks to our wonderful guests for being us today, and everybody else out there. This is Dr. Kevin Cuccaro and Dr. Melissa Cady with the Changed Physician Podcast. And until next time, stay well.